Hello and welcome to a Thursday quarantine stream. How you doing? We're here. It's Thursday, 3:45 Pacific Standard Time. YouTube and Twitch. It's Loke9. It's your Thursday quarantine stream. It looks like the Monday gaming streams have been working out all right. Trying to get, as long as I pick a game that is relatively unintense for my computer. It seems like everything runs pretty well. I think I got the audio stuff figured out, but those are fun and tiring in their own way. Today we're talking about, as you might guess from the title, Proposition 22 in California. And I have a link to an article I'm going to read in a second, at least in the YouTube streams, in the description. So if you're on Twitch, I would go for YouTube, or it's also a little bit in one of my retweets on Twitter, or you could just look up CNET's article about AB5 Prop 22. But yeah, so any announcements? Not really. I don't think so. I guess the only one thing, again, I've added a little PayPal donation link to a lot of my stream descriptions and on my channel description, at least on YouTube. I know Twitch has its own things. I don't know how those work, and I'm not really looking into it. Monday, I will probably stream normally. But next Thursday, I don't know if I will stream because I will be busy. The week after that, the week after next, this would be the week of the 14th. We'll proceed as normal. And the 2 weeks after that, I will actually be out and about. So I'll have to think of alternative stream times and methods. I have some ideas of what I'm going to do. We're actually going to be doing some traveling. So maybe I'll switch to like IG Live or something like that. But next week's going to be a little different. Maybe just a Monday. The week after that should be normal. And then the 2 weeks after that will be modified as it was in July. I think that's it. How's everybody doing? So, the catalyst for today's stream, and if you're a Californian, maybe you're aware of this. You've probably seen ads pop up on TV or elsewhere, actually on YouTube. The thumbnail is from a screenshot I took of the comment section in a Yes on Prop 22 ad. And I thought those reactions were funny. But why don't I back up and start with California Assembly Bill 5, which passed in the fall of last year and went into effect this year, which was basically aimed at companies like Uber and Lyft, these rideshare companies, to effectively force them to classify their employees as employees for the purposes of, what the protections and insurances that an employee would get in California, which in terms of labor protections probably has some of the highest in the union. Now there was a lot of obviously Uber and Lyft don't want to do this because it'll cost them more money to comply with California labor laws, among other things. And there are other sides to that discussion as well, which I'll get into a little bit throughout the episode. I think this will probably be a little bit of a shorter one. I'm going to outline the sort of context, talk a little bit about what's going down. I have the article, the CNET article, I'm going to be going through and talking a little bit about the actual campaign for Proposition 22. And then I'm probably going to bounce after that because it's a pretty deep one. And I can't say that I'm a labor code expert, but I can offer a little bit of perspective on that and maybe some parts of it that people haven't been aware of previously. So that was that bill. It passed. Uber and Lyft have not been complying. And obviously we have a pandemic right now, so the circumstances are a little bit interesting, I guess, to say the least. And the article goes into a little bit more, but I want to talk about Proposition 22 specifically, because, for AB5, basically what it does is it changes the conditions by which someone is able to be called an independent contractor or versus an employee. So in the sort of gig economy, rideshare and things like that, all these different apps where you can do a service and the app gets a cut and they hook you up with the clientele and then you do the job and blah blah blah, and you get paid through their app. They basically get away with calling all the people who make their app work by performing the service independent contractors, so that they don't have to treat them as employees and do things like pay for healthcare and certain taxes that they pay to the state to provide various things, disability and all unemployment. There's a lot of different things that the classification of employer or employee versus independent contractor has to effects in terms of California labor laws. And I guess I could bring up, for my line of work, being a freelance musician, I saw a lot of people who are getting very, very scared because there's a part in the law, and I was reading through it today, kind of like brushing up, and again, there's a lot, and it's pretty granular. There's stuff like about like commercial fishing, and like if you're like a private practice, like medical, or you work in like certain kinds of animal care, like, or if you're an esthetician, there's like, it's really specific. There is a sub point in there about something about fine arts, which would make you think we'd be exempted as musicians, because the issue that people were afraid of is like, okay, I get a call from a venue and they want a 5-piece band to play for 3 hours on Saturday night. Okay, so I'll call up my buddies to put together a band. Now, what happens in that situation? Am I their employer? Am I temporary contracting employer? Or like there's like a thing in there about like, if you are sort of like basically a manager, like you're the in-between for a client and a worker, and you like set the pay and you decide who's on the job and who's not. You're effectively an employer and they're effectively an employee. So it's like, if I put together a band for a gig, am I their employer? Do I have to like pay extra taxes? Do I have to like provide like insurance or whatever? There's a lot of people bringing up issues like this. Now, certain businesses were able to get exempt from these reclassifications because this classification, this bill, is based on a couple of other like court rulings. And I didn't go so far as to like look up the entire history of the context for this bill. But certainly if someone who's more like you know, more up and up on terms of like law and like labor law and stuff like that in particular. I mean, I'm sure you can go hog wild with this and really like get into the nitty gritty of how this can be interpreted. For me, I was like, well, I don't know. Again, I've never been in like a contractor kind of position. I haven't like had to put together like a band necessarily. Although I've had a couple opportunities where I could do stuff like that, but it's not really my main thing. My main thing is to be sort of like the hired gun that comes in, and does the gig, and gets the check and goes home if they get paid. If we get paid that night. So I don't necessarily have the full perspective on that. And what I found was the issue was, I mean, there's a couple of issues with that. Is that it's hard to really keep track of how much this was affecting people because it went into effect this year. And there were some anecdotes of people maybe having more difficulties, or they had to do more workarounds to make sure that nobody was getting classified as an employee, so that they can continue to do these gigs, as normal and whatnot. But it was hard to find too much concrete information about how it was affecting people. And I mean, it's hard to determine, like, in only a few months, because as we all know, we had to go on lockdown pretty early on into the year, so we couldn't even really fully see the effects of this bill on, freelance workers. Not to mention, like, I can have a whole conversation, I have many conversations about the nature of working in music, in LA and California in general, or just, on any scene, and the ups and downs of that, and the difficulties navigating that, space, and whether or not a bill like this, what effect it has on the industry, and, how much the industry has changed over the decades and how much it hasn't, including how much people actually get paid. The joke about, I've been doing the same gig for 30 years and it pays the same as it did back then, kind of thing. So I understand there were difficulties there. There are people trying to get traction in the sort of music communities to sort of get an exemption from the bill and things like that, which is, I think it's a reasonable concern to have. I think it's a reasonable discussion to have. Obviously, like, I am generally in favor of anything that provides workers more protections. I'm not a big fan of the way our industry is structured in the first place. However, if things happen to make it where it's like really difficult for people to just do business in general, and there isn't like a mode for us to go through in a reasonable time period to make sure that people can sort of protect their livelihoods, then we can have a conversation there. But what is an entirely different conversation and is completely unaddressed is Proposition 22. Now, if you don't know about how sort of the voting system in California works, is that we have some element of direct democracy in which, if you get a number of signatures on a petition, you can put forth a bill to be voted on that, the public will just get to decide on. So there have been a number of propositions. I remember like one of the big ones that people might have remembered was like Prop 8 back in the day about legalizing same-sex marriage, along with other things. And it's certainly a controversial lawmaking process. And I think they go over it in the article, but like basically, you can sort of grassroots your way to 1 million signatures, but that's not so easy. But if you pay people by the signature, which is what, these tech companies had done to get a bill on the ballot, you're a lot more likely to succeed. So a lot of these propositions, again, like everything, you got to follow the money, and see who's trying to get what passed and why. And basically what Proposition 22 is not like we're going to strike down AB5 and everything that it lays out. but it specifically is an exemption for rideshare drivers. And it like as like a concession, it gives some added benefits to their drivers, but nothing really approaching what they would get if they were treated as employees in California. And honestly, I was completely unaware that this was going to be on the ballot until I was walking by the living room in my house, and they were watching TV, and on TV came an ad, and I tried to look it up. I didn't look that hard, but if you're in California, you've probably seen some ads, and I saw it, and it just kind of it pissed me off. Honestly, I was like, "What is this bullshit?" Because it was basically like every commercial is nowadays where it's like this sad piano music, and it's like, we know things are tough because of the pandemic and things are really hard right now, but you know who's making it worse? California lawmakers, and they want to destroy the lives of these drivers by making it harder for them to work. So vote yes on Prop 22 to diminish their worker protections, so that Uber and Lyft don't have to. Obviously they didn't say all that other shit, but it was like trying to paint it as like this is hurting workers, and it's like clearly the people with the most to lose here are these tech companies who would lose a lot more money if they had to actually treat their workers as employees in the state of California. And now I've just been seeing ads all over the place. Again, on the YouTube thumbnail, I have a screenshot of some comments from a yes on Prop 22 ad where people were just like, this is bullshit, which, that is heartening. I see mostly people seeing through it and being like, actually, this is complete trash. Because there are other industries, like I said, I'm a musician. People in my industry are worried about the effects of the bill, how it affects our industry and how it affects our ability to do our work, which is, it's a conversation to be had. But this bill or this proposition would not affect us in any way. It only affects these rideshare drivers. So, I mean, all that is to say, basically, Proposition 22 is an absolute scam. I'll try to do. I would encourage everyone to do their best to inform anybody who might. I don't think most people are. I mean, I know a lot of people who are aware of AB5 in California just because, like, that's my industry. People in my field. I don't know about if a lot of people really know it beyond that, other than they know it was written basically in response to Uber and Lyft and their treatment of their workers. So I think most people would generally have like a more favorable view of it, because I can't say that big tech has like the best general. They may not be seen in the best light by all people, but the money that they're pouring into this is something to be concerned about. So again, yes, urging people as much as possible to kind of see through the BS. That's sort of my opening contextualizing of this thing, but I want to go through a little bit and basically just read through this article. In fact, I might just read it all the way top to bottom because it's kind of crazy. But basically, like, what has been the consequences and what has been the effects, and how far-reaching has this campaign against this bill and for this proposition, and how has it affected people, and how, concerning it should be, and why people should be really like, their bullshit, the bullshitometer should be, tuned up to max settings. So why don't we go ahead and take a look. I'll pull up this article. This is from CNET. Derek Kerr, written a few days ago, published a few days ago. And this basically follows a particular individual who is an advocate, just like a random, advocate. I think she's like a professor or something like that. We'll see it in the article, but how she's been sort of like targeted for harassment over in the recent past over her support of the bill, and then some of the details around the Yes on Prop 22 movement, if you can call it that. So inside Uber and Lyft's fight over gig worker status, labor activists are targeted in a social media campaign as gig economy companies spend millions to prevent workers from becoming employees. Okay, so Veena Dubal couldn't stop her mind from reeling. It was around midnight on March 29, and coronavirus lockdowns were in effect. Okay, so this is about the early beginning of the year. She says she paced back and forth between her 3 young children's rooms, making sure each one was okay. She tried to convince herself she was overreacting. It didn't work. Earlier in the day, she'd received a text message from a friend telling her to look at Twitter. Dubal, an employment labor law professor at the University of California Hastings College of the Law and a vocal critic of Uber and Lyft, opened the app. She'd been getting an unusual amount of hateful tweets over the past few weeks, but that didn't prepare her for what she saw. Her home address, salary, and husband's name broadcast on the social media site by someone she says had been one of her most relentless critics. Quote, "Our dear Veena may be hoarding a lot of clams," unquote, read the tweet by @BlueErpy in reference to Dubal's salary. I kept thinking, oh my god, all of these crazy people on Twitter now have my home address and are going to do something horrible, Dubal says. Still noticeably rattled several months later, quote, "They know I'm at home. I'm a sitting target." Continuing on, Dubal says she had inadvertently been pulled into a bizarre world where people on Twitter and Facebook seemed to think she was behind a California law, Assembly Bill 5, or AB 5, that addressed labor protections for gig workers. One of the main goals of AB 5 was to get companies like Uber and Lyft, 2 of the world's largest ride-hailing services that rely on the work of independent contractors, to reclassify their drivers as employees so workers can get basic benefits like healthcare, sick leave, and a minimum wage. The law was actually authored by Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez, a Democrat from San Diego, someone Dubal had met only a couple of times in group settings. Dubal is an outspoken supporter of AB 5. She's often quoted in the media, has written articles and op-eds, and has sent letters to unions, the California legislature, and Congress to advocate in support of gig workers, but she said she had no hand in creating the law. The idea might not have gone viral by accident, but rather by design. Dubal seems to have become a target in a complex campaign involving social media harassment, takedown articles on conservative websites, and actions by at least 2 public relations firms hired by Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Instacart, and Postmates. One of those PR firms, Sacramento-based MB Public Affairs, submitted a lengthy public records request on July 28 for Dubal's email correspondence with 130 other labor activists, academics, and union leaders. Quote, "It's clearly a coordinated campaign," says William Fitzgerald, who currently runs a strategic advocacy firm called The Worker Agency and previously worked for Google on both its public policy and communications teams. Quote, "What Uber is doing now with this is way further than anything I've seen. It's a totally different ballgame." Public records obtained by CNET from the California Secretary of State show the 5 gig economy companies hired the PR firms to work on a ballot measure campaign that's up for a vote in California's November election. The ballot measure, Proposition 22, was jointly sponsored by the 5 companies and aims to specifically exempt them from AB 5. The proposition suggests creating an alternative to the law that keeps workers as independent contractors, but adds a few more benefits such as expense reimbursement and a health care subsidy. At this point, this article, there's a deep rabbit hole with this article. It gets more wild. But I want to point out, if you look up, in fact, I can probably do that right now. I was doing it earlier. If you look up Proposition 22, you'll get you check out the ballot PDF, which should be, at least for me, it's the first result. It kind of goes into some of the details about the proposition. But the fun thing is you can see exactly who the supporters are And you see things like the unions that support it: California Peace Officers Association, California State Sheriff's Association, California Police Chiefs Association. So for some reason, cops love Prop 22, even though it has nothing to do with their business. I'm guessing that they're getting some amount of money from these companies for this. And you could see, I'll scroll down to the campaign finance. You could look at a list of like political action committee spending in terms of this proposition, and it's basically 100 to 1 in terms of yes to no in terms of spending. So they're dumping a lot of money into this thing, and it's just one state. So I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that. I'll continue with the article. The effect of the company's battle over AB5 came to a head last week after a California judge set a deadline for Uber and Lyft to comply with the law. As a result, the two companies said they'd halt operations in the state until the vote on Proposition 22. Just hours before the deadline, an appeals court ruled Uber and Lyft could continue operating as usual through at least mid-October. Uber, Instacart, and Postmates, which Uber acquired last month, didn't respond to multiple requests for comment. Lyft and DoorDash referred CNET to the Yes on Proposition 22 campaign. Quote, the Yes on Prop 22 campaign is doing what every campaign is doing. We're focused on educating voters about why they should vote yes on Prop 22. End quote, a spokesman said for the campaign said in an email. Very enlightening. Winning the Proposition 22 campaign is of dire importance to Uber and Lyft, according to filings with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. If the two companies are required to reclassify their drivers as employees in California, they'll lose hundreds of millions of dollars on an annual basis, says an analysis by Barclays. DoorDash, Instacart, and Postmates have also indicated that reclassifying their workers could hurt their businesses. Expenditures in the public records obtained by CNET show the five companies have employed at least 19 firms to do consulting work to help them wage their Proposition 22 battle. At least 5 of the firms named in the documents have worked on campaigns for big tobacco, big oil, and big chemical companies, including Philip Morris, Chevron, and Monsanto. So, they have really admirable bedmates there, and this sort of gives you a glimpse of the what they're putting into. And again, this kind of goes back, as I read this, keep in mind when I did the stream last week about capitalism and what businesses do to dominate the market. It's not about providing the best thing and the most innovation. It's about using their money and their influence to affect, the structure of the society that they're participating in, affecting the law, using their money to hire these firms. All that they do is to, try to find the best ways to sell their point, try to dig up dirt on competition, or they buy out, all these different tactics that they use to gain the most market share, to dominate the market. It's not about being a better business. It's about being a more brutal business and using the money that you don't pay your workers in order to wage battles like these. So again, I want to tie it back to what we've been talking about. When I talk about capitalism, when people talk about capitalism, this is what happens when, in that exchange whereby, you as an employee, you're doing the work, and the work you do gives value to the company, to the boss, and so on. The value that you add that is not then paid back to you in your wages is accumulated and used for things like this. And it's important to be very, very clear about what, that pattern and that dynamic and what it actually creates for our society when they're able to do these kind of things. But I'll continue with the article. The gig economy company's political involvement comes as Silicon Valley seems to be shifting away from a left-leaning free-for-all to an industry that appears to be increasingly working with conservative causes. I will say the the editorializing in terms of left-leaning from the article is more like, the sort of liberal-ish tech companies that say gay rights, but if you're I don't know, I can go on and on about that, but it's again stuff we've talked about surface level liberalism and how it's very easy to co-opt things and just pay lip service and maybe throw a few dollars at certain issues without actually making substantive contributions to better society. Anyway, Facebook, for instance, has been accused by critics of loosening the screws on democracy by allowing PR firms, including Cambridge Analytica, to mine its data to help get President Donald Trump elected. Google, Apple, Amazon, and Microsoft have been criticized by human rights organizations and sometimes even their own employees for their business practices, such as entering into military contracts with the U.S. government or deflecting antitrust complaints. In the case of the gig economy companies, their current focus appears to be akin to union busting based on the types of PR firms they've hired. Quote, I come out of organized labor, so I'm used to the tactics companies can use when you empower workers, Gonzalez said in a phone interview earlier this month. I knew that we would definitely get pushback. But Dubal, as a private citizen, says she wasn't fully aware of such tactics. And another thing she didn't know on that sleepless night in March was just how big the campaign against her would get. And then this next section kind of goes over what I mentioned earlier. California is its own breed of politics. Follow the money. Ballot measure spending in the state is the second most expensive type of political spending in the world, with only the U.S. presidential election taking the lead, according to McQuan. As of August 28, the 5 gig economy companies had contributed more than $111 million to Proposition 22, according to California's Fair Political Practices Commission, with Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash the biggest backers. By contrast, spending on Florida's 6 ballot measures for 2020 totals just over $68 million. One of the reasons for this extravagant spending in California is the state's influence elsewhere. When AB 5 was signed into law last September, Gonzalez said one of her objectives with the bill was for California to set the standard for gig worker protections worldwide. Quote, if you're Uber and Lyft, what are you going to do, McQuan says. You're going to throw the kitchen sink at this. Because they know, California, the exciting thing, I guess, in terms of California's politics and lawmaking is that we do have the ability, because we have a large economy, to set certain precedences nationwide. So as much as the AB 5 is certainly there's controversy about it and there's certain conversations, the ability to sort of rein in these tech companies is promising for labor rights. And you can see why they're spending so much to fight back. So far, again for the article, so far that seems to be the case based on spending for and against Proposition 22. While the gig economy companies have contributed more than $111 million to their Yes campaign, unions and labor groups have contributed more than $3.6 million to the No side, according to the Fair Political Practices Commission. The Yes campaign spent more than $2.5 million on campaign consultants between October 2019 and June 2020, according to public records. The figure represents roughly 14% of the total $18.1 million spent on the campaign during this period. So they were prepared to have that bill passed, and they were prepared to spend money to get this proposition on this year's ballot if it passed, and it did pass, and now you can see them sinking more money into getting an exemption for their industry. To get Proposition 22 on the ballot, the campaign said it paid canvassers $4 per signature, according to the San Francisco Chronicle. And you can imagine how enticing that would be for people. By the end of February, it had amassed 1 million signatures, and the initiative, known as the Protect App-Based Drivers and Services Act, was officially cleared for the November election. That's where there appeared to be a pivot towards heavier spending on PR firms, including Winner and Mandaback campaigns, Baker, Castillo, and Fairbanks and MB Public Affairs, according to public records. McQuan says the Yes campaign likely enlisted a selective network of consultants to cover specific tactics and strategies. While these three firms have worked on campaigns for Republican candidates and issues, according to the nonpartisan financial tracking group Open Secrets, MB Public Affairs is known for taking on conservative causes. Founded in 1997, MB Public Affairs has earned a reputation for opposition research, the practice of unearthing dirt on political rivals. According to McQuan, it's run by Mark Bogtic, ain't that a name, whom the Los Angeles Times once called a garrulous operative known to his friends as Bogey. As of June 30th, expenditures in the public records show the Proposition 22 campaign had paid the firm around $240,000, mostly for consulting work and some polling and survey research. I mean, I hate to get kindergarten, but a man named Bogtic, who's known to his friends as Bogey, for a shadowy consulting firm that generally digs up dirt on people. Anyway, on its website, MB Public Affairs says it provides clients a unique combination of political vulnerability, research capabilities, public policy issue expertise, strategic analysis, and communication skills. Beautiful. The firm's past list of clients includes Altria, formerly known as Philip Morris, and three prominent Republicans, actor and former California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, former eBay CEO and California gubernatorial candidate Meg Whitman, and Florida Senator Marco Rubio, everybody's favorite boy. The firm also worked on campaigns for the agriculture industry in disputes with farm workers over the past decade and for the plastics industry on halting styrofoam bans in 2013. So, just history of working with some of the most appalling figures and entities in our political history. I know people generally like Schwarzenegger. I mean, he's okay, I guess. A lot of these other guys, pretty despicable. One of the reasons the Yes on Proposition 22 campaign hired MB Public Affairs is for its opposition research. A person familiar with the matter told CNET. The person said Bicker Castillo and Fairbanks, which had been paid more than $521,000 as of June 30th and works on social media campaigns, runs the Yes on Proposition 22 campaign's official Twitter account and deals with press and communications. Winner and Mandaback campaigns, which has been paid more than $541,000 and is considered a full-service PR firm, has been mainly in charge of signature gathering and advertising, according to the person. I mean, shit. I mean, there are so many people who they do call-outs, targeted harassment, and roasting and stuff online. It turns out you can get paid, how many hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that professionally in the political realm. So these tech companies are paying these massive PR firms with these shadowy pasts to basically do online trolling and to astroturf political movements and taking advantage of California's lawmaking system. And the article kind of goes on to explain the money that's being paid to why people should vote on this thing that really only benefits them. But I kind of want to go fast forward a little bit. To kind of go into make it to drive it home a little bit about the effects on, which is kind of what the article is doing, driving home the effects on to other people when these kind of campaigns take place. So this next paragraph, Digi knows and Red State. After her home address and salary were shared on Twitter, Duvall was wrecked with anxiety. She said she worried about her family's safety and didn't know why she was being attacked so relentlessly. She reported the incident to local police, who she says circled her block every few hours. She also paid a digital forensics firm $600 to scrub the internet of her personal information. Just 12 days after the tweet, a 1,400-word post titled Vina Dubal, the unelected puppet master behind California's AB5 law, written by contributor Jennifer Oliver O'Connell, was published on the conservative website Communities Digital News. Dubal says neither O'Connell nor anyone from Communities Digital News contacted her for a comment. The April 10 post, which includes a few of Dubal's tweets and statements made in interviews, calls AB5 author Gonzalez a sock puppet and describes Dubal as someone who should not be allowed to be a dog catcher, let alone have influence and set policy that dictates the lives of hard-working Americans. I mean, you always gotta love the it's always this weird, like, I guess you can call it like a rhetorical strategy, or a weird, like, the way that, like, these, like, conservative pundits and mouthpieces will cynically weaponize certain things, where it's like, on one hand, they're trying to insult this person by saying that they're not fit to be a dog catcher, but they shouldn't be able to influence the lives of hardworking Americans. It's kind of the thing with, like, AOC, where, like, Republicans and conservatives are always talking about the everyman and hardworking Americans and things like that. At the same time, they'll disparage AOC for having been a bartender and say she's not fit to be a lawmaker, as it's supposed to be this elite thing, which kind of gives it the game about, you know, how they try to cynically weaponize talking points that if you look into just a little bit, you can see how bullshit it is. But with the amount of money and the amount of reach that they have, because these talking points and these views and this legislation is bankrolled by some of the worst people in the world, who tend to have the most money. And again, if you pull up the thread even just a little bit, it's very easy to see these connections. But we're so inundated with all of this that it becomes inescapable. I want to continue with the article. The post was followed by two more by O'Connell in Communities Digital News, both published on April 22. One of those was titled Veena Dubal and AB5, Big Labor's Excuse to Grab Power. Big labor. Holy shit. Big labor in America, because that's a fucking thing. And the other was called Dubal and AB5, a moment of privilege dictating how Californians can work. All three posts claim Dubal authored AB5. Quote, Veena Dubal, the law's true author, created this tortured, miasmic law in order to destroy the very foundation and structure of independent contracting, reads one of the April 22 posts. Yes, the foundation and structure of independent contracting, that thing dreamt up by the founding fathers when Columbus crossed the ocean blue, that God-given right to get paid by an app that doesn't guarantee you, you know, leave or health care or anything like that. Again, more cynical bullshit. Quote, think about how easy it is to make any message go viral, says Kenneth Henry, an assistant professor of marketing at Penn State, who researches online persuasion. Quote, how many people do you see in your timelines, maybe on Facebook or Twitter, that are sharing things that aren't correct, but they seem correct because they came from some organization that sounds important? Facebook, definitely. People reposting things from, like, meme pages and, like, bullshit aggregate websites like a Blue Lives Matter or whatever that have no credibility or verifiability other than the fact that maybe a lot of people shared it. Anyway, in response, Dubal says she began blocking people on Twitter. O'Connell, who's been a contributor to Communities Digital News since 2014 and describes herself on LinkedIn as a writer-consultant, has two versions of a personal website, both called As the Girl Turns. Each showcases her work as an independent writer and yoga instructor. This is very California. Someone who teaches yoga and they'll do videos. Some white lady, who, like, you know, is in, like, a fucking pretzel position, talking about inner peace, who spends her time getting paid to instigate harassment campaigns against people. The new website was launched in 2020, includes a forum where people can submit grievances about AB5. O'Connell has tweeted at Dubal and Gonzalez numerous times. At Lorena8080 is butthurt for her friend at Veena Dubal, reads an August 6 tweet, referencing Gonzalez's Twitter handle. Quote, we haven't forgotten about her hashtag AB5 manipulation, and people are not letting her get away with trying to skew the truth on hashtag Prop22. We see you, Vanal. O'Connell, in an interview with CNET, said she opposes AB5 because the law has decimated half of my income. And a parenthetical, AB5 also applies to certain contract professions, such as writers, musicians, translators, and housekeepers. Wait, yoga instructor. How is her business affected by AB5? Does she employ other yoga instructors? Like, how does that work? I would imagine she does, provides a service for clientele as like an independent business. So I don't know where this is coming from. Honestly, I should do a fucking character study on this lady, which is kind of what this article is trying to do, but she sounds very fascinating. Her activism against AB5 began in February after one of her first tweets about the law was mentioned in a post by the conservative website Red State. Shortly thereafter, O'Connell became one of the most vocal members of the hashtag Repeal AB5 community based on her social media activity. Hero Davis, an editor-at-large for Red State, wrote the February 4 post mentioning O'Connell's tweet, which said, AB5, quote, disenfranchised hundreds of professions. Red State Deputy Managing Editor Jennifer Von Laar has also written posts about AB5 and Uber and Lyft. On LinkedIn, Van Laar describes herself as an opposition researcher and communications professional specializing in political campaigns, activist organizations, and conservative/libertarian causes. Van Laar and Davis have both tweeted at Dubal and mentions Gonzalez on Twitter on a near daily basis. Quote, watching Vina and Lorena against the ropes is awesome, but we have to keep up the pressure, quote, end quote, Van Laar tweeted on February 5th. That tweet has since disappeared. When asked for comment, Van Laar wrote in an email to CNET that, quote, I'm not involved in the Prop 22 campaign, simply someone who's been affected by AB5 personally speaking up in favor of the proposition, quote, end quote. She declined to comment further. I'm just trying to see how much other articles left. I mean, I could go. It's a fairly lengthy article. I could go through the rest of it. Whoops. I certainly encourage people to read through themselves, because it's kind of a fucking trip. I'll continue again because this is going to be a shorter one anyway. So I'll continue. Kind of breezing through this. It isn't uncommon for campaign operatives to work with publications they believe can help reach potentially sympathetic voters and readers. When Facebook hired the PR firm Definers in 2018, dozens of articles supportive of the social media company were published on the conservative news site NTK Network, which is affiliated with Definers. A spokesman for the Yes on Prop 22 campaign said it hasn't made any payments or provided support of any kind to O'Connell, Davis, Van Laar, Communities Digital News, or Red State. Sonoma State Professor McQuan says that when companies enlist PR firms, they're typically hiring them for their contacts and ties. Oftentimes, he says the companies don't even know who the PR firms are working with because part of the goal is to distance themselves from the on-the-ground work. Quote, the companies will say, those people that are tearing us up online, that needs to go away. The firm says, okay, McQuan says. Quote, there's no need to utter the words plausible deniability because that's a given. And then it kind of goes on the Lollipop Guild. Goes on to sort of like introduce some more of these ragtag group of people who are opposing AB5, who ostensibly have some connection with it and some reason for having an opinion. The Lollipop Guild, I'll read this first point. O'Connell, Davis, and Van Laar are among a group of more than 50 people who seem determined to repeal AB5 based on their social media activity. They appear to be well organized, citing and linking to each other, and generally post to Twitter or Facebook on a daily basis. Nearly all of the people identify as freelancers hurt by AB5, describing themselves as writers, actors, musicians, or translators, as well as other professions and small business owners. As of Thursday, only a few of the people whose social media activity CNET reviewed describe themselves as Uber or Lyft drivers. So a bunch of people who seem to be affected by AB5, but who would not be affected at all by Prop 22. Maybe they think that they would get exemptions after this passes, which is unlikely because other industries have gotten exemptions. And the only reason this exemption for the bill is being brought up is because of the money of these big tech companies. So that's fun. Anti-AB5 activist groups seem to have been popping up online around December 2019, but mass postings to social media sites didn't really pick up until February. Based on a review of the activity, at least 20 Facebook groups and pages, 10 websites, 9 Twitter accounts, 5 YouTube channels, and 2 Instagram accounts have been launched with the aim of denouncing AB5. A podcast series, an online speaker series, and a Google photo album titled AB5 Victims also showcase people opposed to the law. These online assets are often linked to each other. Very unsuspicious. For example, a website called AB5 Facts, which lists Davis as the contact person and sells merch like a $25 My Labor, My Choice Repeal AB5 hoodie, it doesn't mention where the proceeds go, is linked to the Twitter account Faces of AB5. That Twitter account is linked to one of the most popular anti-AB5 Facebook groups, Freelancers Against AB5, which has more than 18,000 members. As a politician, Gonzalez says the social media onslaught over AB5 is like no other issue she's worked on. On a daily basis, she says people body shame her, call her names, spread misinformation, and create memes about her. Based on a review of the activity, tweets like this now deleted one are common. Quote, @Lorena8080 is a pathetic punk. She will be the skank shank magnet when she gets to the big house, end quote. Gonzalez says people have also posted her address and photos of her house online. Although if she's a public employee, I think her address is already widely available. Quote, I've had to report a number of straight out racist, sexist, and violent posts. Gonzalez says, I don't worry about that. I worry more about doing what's right. They think they can quiet you. Let's see. Local members of the anti-AB5 community sometimes post calls to action, telling people to comment on Gonzalez's tweets and pressure other legislators who back the law. Some of this is detailed in a document seen by CNET, which is temporarily posted on Twitter by Rob Gordon, who calls himself a Lollipop Guild undercover operative. The document, titled AB5 Strategy Brainstorming, catalogs an organized game plan for opponents of AB5. Gordon, who's worked on independent contractor issues for several years, told CNET he calls himself the producer of the document since it's a collaborative effort with several authors. It details the group's political objectives, talking points, like AB5 screws everybody, and contains a list of offensive /defamatory groups and people. That list includes Dibal and Gonzalez. O'Connell is named as a writer for the group. The document says potential supporters include the Republican Party and the Yes on Prop 22 campaign, while opponents include the Democratic Party and labor unions. Quote, I wrote it for the exact reason stated, to document a movement, Gordon said in an email. He said he hasn't received any funding or support from the Yes on Prop 22 campaign, either directly or indirectly. Quote, I think independent workers are an asset to the economy, not a liability. Dibal says his strategy of aggressively blocking people on Twitter calmed things down for a bit. But on the night of August 6th, she said she started getting warning messages from friends She started getting warning messages from friends about a certain tweet. Although she couldn't bear to look, Dibal says she forced herself. The Yes on Prop 22 Twitter account run by Bicker and Castillo and Fairbanks retweeted one of Dibal's posts about the ballot measure and told her to, quote, quit with irrelevant analogies. 15 minutes later, the Twitter account posted another tweet that appeared to be aimed at riling up the Lollipop Guild. I can't believe these fucking people. Anyway, quote, if Veena Dibal is standing up for drivers as she claims, why does she continue to silence those who try to engage her, end quote. Reads the @VoteYesOn22 tweet. Quote, if you've been blocked by Veena Dibal, reply with her screenshot below. Over the next couple of days, Dibal says she was bombarded with tweets. One of the people who tweeted their screenshot was Evan Miller, data director for Riga's Strategies, a PR firm the gig economy companies have paid more than $456,000 to work on their Prop 22 campaign. according to the public records from California's Secretary of State. Miller and Rodriguez Strategies didn't return multiple requests for comment. So, again, this person who I've never heard of, this proposition where I hadn't heard of until I saw an ad for it. This is the power of money. This is the power of PR and consulting firms. And this is sort of what happens in the shadow of our political lawmaking, sphere. This is sort of how social engineering, social change in this country operates. And again, this is sort of like a case study on the harassment of this one woman who is sort of an advocate for this bill and the lawmaker who is behind it. And it's funny when people talk about targeted harassment online and so on and so forth. But it seems like any of these little things that have there's a genuine grain of truth to them are oftentimes just weaponized in conversations to sort of give some credence to whatever argument you're actually trying to make. And again, my advice generally applies to most situations is just follow the money. A lot of these situations it's hard to tell, are these people getting paid to say these things, and they'll say they won't or whatever, and yet there's these very strange associations among these different groups, to where if you follow the thread long enough, you'll see, the money turns up eventually. Let's see. Bicker Castillo and Fairbanks says on its website that one of its services is appealing, quote, to the self-interest of the third-party groups necessary to turn the tide. It adds, "We turn coalitions into grassroots armies by giving allies the tools to make it easy for them to take action and influence public policy outcomes." Grassroots armies. Again, choice of words, interesting, and calling it grassroots, also interesting. At least 10 of the PR firms hired by Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and Instacart say social media or coalition building is part of their skill set. Quote, "We've seen a lot of disinformation in service campaigns," says Zareen Karazian, assistant editor at the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab, who reviewed the anti-AB5 network's social media activity for CNET. Quote, "This seems to be targeted harassment as a service, which is an adjacent but distinct phenomenon." And the article brings up another individual who, Nicole Moore, who's received much of the same abuse and harassment online. Moore, who herself is a driver. Nicole Moore is a part-time Lyft driver in Southern California and co-founder of the driver group Rideshare Drivers United, which has more than 17,000 members. She says she started getting a surge of tweets in the spring claiming she was paid off by unions because they have so much money and are so powerful and making things worse for drivers. Quote, "Certain drivers that belong to fake associations at Drivers United are fucking it up for the good drivers out there," reads a tweet by the Twitter handle at Anti-Driver Union in response to Moore and referencing Rideshare Driver United's Twitter handle. Quote, "The whole purpose of the abuse would delegitimize my voice as a part-time driver," Moore says, basically to say that I was a union operative being used to manipulate drivers. It got so bad for Sanjukta Paul, an assistant law professor at Wayne State University who's advocated for AB5, that she locked her Twitter account. At one point, she says a group of people disparaging her also directed their tweets at the Twitter accounts of Wayne State and Wayne State Law School. On April 8, Paul co-wrote a letter to Congress with another assistant professor, Marshall Steinbaum, who teaches economics at the University of Utah. The letter discusses the CARES Act and says Uber and Lyft drivers should be classified as employees. After that, Steinbaum says he also became the focus of the anti-AB5 crowd on Twitter. Oh, this is a this is a fun one. Rivera's lawyer, Rivera. Oh, I'll just read from the top. Quote: They draw from the playbook, taking right-wing tropes about out-of-touch academics. Steinbaum says they're presenting themselves as separate from the rideshare issue, but reading our letter, you see it relates directly to rideshare. That made me think this is a cultivated troll army. The same day Steinbaum and Paul sent their letter to Congress, the woman who posted Dubal's home address on Twitter, Gloria Rivera, Gloria Rivera. It's like when I'm reading, I'm like, I get this like twinge to like switch voices. I get caught up in it. So anyway, Gloria Rivera, a freelance translator, tweeted, #academdicks call us trolls because we oppose their uneducated AB5 views. Bring it on. We can't work home and have tons of time. When first contracted by CNET, Rivera said her profession was affected by AB5 and she isn't being paid by the Yes on Prop 22 campaign. Rivera's lawyer, Harmeet Dillon, later emailed CNET. Dillon is a nationally recognized lawyer who serves as the Republican National Committee's elected committeewoman for California. She sued the University of California, Berkeley on behalf of the Berkeley College Republicans and conservative youth organization Young America's Foundation, alleging free speech violations after the school planned to cancel a speech by conservative commentator Ann Coulter because of security concerns. She also represented James Damore, a former Google engineer who sued the tech giant for allegedly discriminating against white men and conservatives. Everybody's favorites. Quote, Ms. Rivera has exercised her First Amendment rights to critique law professor Ravina Dubal's insensitive agenda to destroy the livelihoods of millions of California in the name of particular labor perspective. And again, the article continues to go in depth about the resources levied against Dubal and others who support AB5. The clear connections. I mean, it's a good article. They go pretty in depth about. They follow the paper trail, as it were, which, again, I always encourage people to do. But I wanted to bring this up because, again, I saw that fucking ad about California lawmakers want to hurt workers and not allow them to work in these difficult times. So vote yes on Prop 22. And again, if you follow the money, you can see the clear motivations for this proposition and who it stands to benefit. I want to be able to, one, connect it to all the things that we've been talking about, connect it to what I talk about when how these companies carve out their power in the marketplace, and how growing your company and growing profits is not about innovation. It's not about doing the best business and providing the best service. It's about leveraging your power as a large business, taking advantage of existing things like these PR firms and these consulting companies who are, basically doing paid harassment on, private citizens. And of course, in this moment, try to encourage as many people in California to vote no on Proposition 22. And try to inform as many people as possible that it is a scam proposition. It was paid to be put on the ballot, and to treat it as such, and to try and have that conversation with as many people as possible. But again, this is another great example of a great specific example of some of the things I'm talking about when it comes to how businesses control not just, they're part of the market, but how the economy is structured, how labor law is structured, laws in general, and they get the support of, like police associations, things like that. the connections between these things are large and obvious, and small and more subtle, but they're there, and it's important to recognize them, and to see through the bullshit as much as possible. So, hope that was informative and interesting. Again, I encourage people to check out the full article in the YouTube description, or you can look up CNET, their Prop 22 article, Prop 22 Urban Lift, blah, blah, blah. All right, yeah. So again, next week is going to be a little different. Monday stream should be normal. I don't think there's going to be a Thursday stream. And I'll give reminders for how things will go in the future. But again, thanks for watching. Hopefully you can have an enjoyable weekend. Again, keep an eye out on the people you care about. Keep an eye out on yourself. Stay safe.